Have you ever had the unsettling feeling that your life looks perfectly normal on the outside, yet something deep inside refuses to stay quiet? You wake up, follow the routine, answer messages, complete your responsibilities, and smile when expected. But when the world finally goes silent, another voice begins to speak. A voice you have spent years trying to ignore. It whispers that you are living someone else's life, that the person staring back at you in the mirror is not the person you were meant to become. Most people spend their entire existence running from that voice, because facing it would mean questioning everything they believe about themselves. Carl Jung believed that the greatest danger in life is not failure. It is unconsciousness. It is living according to patterns you never chose, fears you never understood, and expectations that were never truly yours. The most terrifying prison has no bars. It exists inside the mind, built from invisible habits, hidden wounds, and forgotten parts of yourself. And the cruelest part is that most people never realize they are trapped until they have already wasted decades chasing a life that was never authentic. What if the anxiety you fight every day is not your enemy? What if your loneliness is trying to teach you something? What if the chaos in your mind is actually the doorway to becoming the person you were always supposed to be? Jung spent his entire life studying the hidden forces that shape human behavior, and the lessons he discovered remain as powerful today as they were a century ago. But almost no one applies them. Not because they are complicated, but because they demand something most people are unwilling to give: complete honesty with themselves. By the end of this journey, you may never look at your own mind the same way again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Or answer this: what is the one part of yourself you've been avoiding the longest? If you're ready to explore the depths of your own mind, subscribe and leave a like. It helps this message reach people who need it. Lesson 1. Your greatest enemy is the self you refuse to see. First lesson Carl Jung wanted every human being to understand is deceptively simple. Your greatest enemy is not outside of you. It lives within the parts of yourself you refuse to see. Every person carries two identities. One is the face presented to the world. It is polite, controlled, successful, confident, and carefully designed to earn approval. Jung called this the persona. It is necessary because society requires us to play roles. We are employees, parents, friends, students, leaders. Without a persona, social life would become impossible. But behind that carefully crafted mask lives another identity. The one you hide, the one you pretend does not exist. Your anger, your envy, your fear, your selfishness, your insecurity, your deepest desires, your hidden talents, even your courage, if you have spent years convincing yourself that you are weak. Jung called this hidden world the shadow. Most people believe becoming a better person means destroying the shadow. Jung argued the opposite. The shadow cannot be destroyed. It can only be ignored or understood. And what you ignore eventually controls you. Think about someone who constantly criticizes others. They may secretly despise their own imperfections. Think about someone obsessed with appearing strong. Deep inside, they may be terrified of being seen as fragile. Think about someone who cannot stand confident people. Perhaps they buried their own ambition long ago. The mind has an extraordinary way of hiding uncomfortable truths. Instead of admitting them, it projects them onto other people. That is why Jung suggested that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. The people who trigger you the most are often holding a mirror you refuse to look into. This is uncomfortable, painfully uncomfortable, because it is much easier to believe that everyone else is the problem. It is easier to blame your parents, your boss, your partner, society, luck, or circumstances. Sometimes those factors truly matter, but Jung's question remains: what are you refusing to see? Imagine entering a dark room you've avoided your entire life. At first, you assume monsters are waiting inside. Your heartbeat accelerates. Your breathing becomes shallow. Every instinct tells you to leave, but as your eyes slowly adjust, you begin to realize something astonishing. There were never monsters. Only forgotten pieces of yourself, waiting in silence. The confidence you abandoned after years of criticism, the creativity you sacrificed to fit in. The dreams you buried because someone laughed at them, the grief you never allowed yourself to feel. The anger you swallowed until it became anxiety, courage you convinced yourself you didn't possess. Your shadow is not only darkness. It also contains your unrealized potential. Every quality you reject does not disappear. It simply retreats into the unconscious, influencing your decisions without your awareness. This is why some people repeat the same toxic relationships over and over. Why others sabotage every opportunity just before success. Why many remain trapped in cycles they cannot explain. The unconscious always finds a way to express itself. If it cannot speak through awareness, it will speak through fear, through anxiety, through compulsions, through self-doubt, through emotional explosions that seem to come from nowhere. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Many people believe fate is happening to them. Jung believed much of what we call fate is simply unconscious behavior repeating itself. That realization changes everything, because if unconscious patterns created your prison, awareness can become the key. But awareness is expensive. It demands humility. It demands silence. It demands the courage to sit alone without distractions and ask terrifying questions. Why do I need everyone's approval? Why am I afraid of failure? Why do I keep choosing what hurts me? Why do I feel empty even after achieving my goals? Most people never ask these questions because the answers threaten the identity they've spent years protecting. Yet every meaningful transformation begins exactly there. Not in comfort, not in motivation. But in radical honesty. The paradox is beautiful. The moment you stop running from yourself, you finally stop running from life. And this leads to an even deeper mystery. Because once you begin recognizing your shadow, another question inevitably appears. If so much of who you are has been unconscious all this time, who are you beneath every mask you've ever worn? That is where the next lesson begins. Lesson 2. Stop looking for yourself in other people's approval. There is a silent addiction that destroys more lives than failure ever could. It is the addiction to being accepted. Most people never notice it because it wears a friendly face. It hides behind politeness, responsibility, kindness, ambition, and the desire to make everyone happy. On the surface, it looks like maturity, but beneath it often lies fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of standing alone. Carl Jung believed that one of the greatest tragedies of modern life is that people slowly become strangers to themselves in order to become acceptable to everyone else. Think about it. How many opinions have you hidden because you were afraid of judgment? How many dreams have you abandoned because they didn't fit someone else's expectations? How many times have you smiled when you wanted to scream? How many times have you said yes while every part of your soul was begging you to say no? Little by little, these moments begin to shape your identity. Not the identity you were born with, the identity you created to survive. Jung called this mask the persona. The persona is useful. Without it, society would be chaos. But the problem begins when the mask becomes your entire life, when you forget that it is only a role. Imagine an actor who spends decades playing the same character. At first, he knows it is only a performance. Years pass, the applause grows louder. People admire him. They expect him to behave exactly like the character they love. One day he walks off the stage and realizes he no longer remembers who he really is. This is exactly what happens to millions of people. They become the perfect employee, the perfect spouse, the perfect parent, the perfect friend, the perfect student, the perfect image. Yet inside, they feel empty. Not because they failed, but because they disappeared. One of Jung's greatest insights was that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. Notice what he did not say. He did not say becoming successful. He did not say becoming admired. He did not say becoming rich. He said becoming yourself. That sounds simple. ISN single quotes T, because becoming yourself often requires disappointing people who only love the version of you that benefited them. This is why authenticity feels so dangerous. Every time you become more honest, someone becomes uncomfortable. The people who controlled you through guilt lose their power. The people who expected your constant obedience become confused. The people who only accepted the version of you that never had boundaries may even accuse you of changing. And they are right. You are changing. That is the point. Growth always looks like betrayal to those who benefited from your silence. Nietzsche once wrote that no price is too High to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Most people understand those words intellectually. Very few live them, because owning yourself demands courage. It means accepting that not everyone will understand your journey. It means accepting loneliness. It means walking through seasons where your old identity has died, but your new one has not fully emerged. Those seasons are uncomfortable. You begin questioning everything. Your friendships, your habits, your beliefs, even your purpose. For a while, it feels as though your entire world is collapsing. But perhaps, it is not collapsing. Perhaps it is finally becoming honest. The strongest people are rarely the loudest. They no longer need constant validation because they have learned something that cannot be taught by society. Peace does not come from being admired. It comes from no longer depending on admiration. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not the mirror in your bathroom. The mirror of your own conscience. Could you honestly say that the life you are living belongs to you? Or are you living according to expectations inherited from your parents, your culture, your friends, social media, or fears that were planted inside your mind long before you were old enough to question them? Jung believed that until we become conscious of these invisible influences, they continue directing our lives without our permission. That realization can be painful, but it is also liberating, because once you recognize the invisible chains, you can begin breaking them, not through rebellion, not through anger, but through awareness. Every day becomes an opportunity to ask one simple question. Am I making this decision because it reflects who I truly am, or because I am afraid of disappointing someone else? That single question has the power to transform an entire life. Little by little, you stop performing. You stop chasing applause. You stop measuring your worth through other people's opinions. Instead, you begin building something much quieter. Self-respect. Unlike approval, self-respect cannot be given. It cannot be bought. It cannot be borrowed. It must be earned. Earned every time you choose honesty over comfort. Earned every time you remain faithful to your values when compromise would be easier. Earned every time you dare to become slightly more authentic than you were yesterday. The irony is remarkable. The moment you stop trying to impress everyone, you become impossible to manipulate. Because fear loses its grip. You no longer fear rejection the way you once did. You no longer fear criticism. You no longer fear standing alone. You discover that solitude is infinitely less painful than living a life that does not belong to you. And once you stop searching for yourself inside other people's opinions, a new question quietly emerges. If your identity is no longer built on approval, then what should it be built upon? That answer changes everything. Lesson 3. Your suffering is trying to teach you something. Most people spend their entire lives trying to escape pain. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They scroll endlessly. They chase pleasure. They avoid silence, because silence forces them to hear what they have been running from. But Carl Jung believed something that completely overturns the way most people think. Your suffering is not always your enemy. Sometimes, it is your greatest teacher. This idea sounds almost impossible to accept. After all, who would willingly choose heartbreak? Who would ask for failure? Who would invite loneliness, betrayal, anxiety, or uncertainty into their lives? No one would. Yet if you study the lives of the strongest people throughout history, you begin to notice an uncomfortable pattern. Their greatest transformations rarely happened during moments of comfort. They happened after everything fell apart, after the relationship ended, after the career collapsed, after the dream failed, after they lost the identity they thought would define them forever. Pain has a strange way of removing illusions. When life is easy, you rarely question yourself. You simply continue moving. But suffering forces you to stop. It demands your attention. It asks questions that comfort never will. Who are you when everything familiar disappears? What remains when success is taken away? Can you still respect yourself when no one is applauding? These are terrifying questions, but they are also necessary. Jung once observed that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Think about those words. There is no awakening. Without discomfort. No profound transformation. Without sacrifice. No real wisdom. Without first confronting the parts of yourself that hurt. Modern culture tells us to eliminate every form of discomfort. To avoid stress. To avoid struggle. To avoid difficult emotions. Yet the human soul does not grow through avoidance. Grows through integration. Imagine a seed buried beneath the ground. From the outside, it appears trapped in darkness. cold, alone, that surrounded by pressure. If the seed could speak, it might believe its life was ending, but in reality, it is beginning. The darkness that feels like destruction is creating new life. Human beings often experience transformation the same way. What feels like the end may actually be the beginning of the person you were always meant to become. This does not mean suffering is good. It means suffering can have meaning. And meaning changes everything. Viktor Frankl, who survived unimaginable horrors, understood this deeply. He realized that people can endure almost any hardship if they discover a reason to keep moving forward. Jung reached a similar conclusion through psychology. Pain ignored becomes suffering without purpose. Pain understood becomes wisdom. Ask yourself honestly, what has your hardest season taught you? Did it reveal who your real friends were? Did it expose your unhealthy habits? Did it force you to become stronger than you ever imagined? Did it teach you that your value is never tied to another person's acceptance? Sometimes life breaks your heart, only to save your soul. There are wounds that never fully disappear, but they no longer control you. Instead, they become reminders. Evidence that you survived what once seemed impossible. Many people carry emotional scars with shame. Jung believed those scars could become sources of strength. Not because the pain disappears, but because you change. You become less naive, more compassionate. More patient, more aware of what truly matters. The person who has never suffered often mistakes comfort for happiness. The person who has walked through darkness understands that peace is far more valuable. There is another danger hidden inside suffering. Bitterness. Pain can either soften your heart. Or harden it. It can make you wiser, or make you resent the world. The difference lies in one decision. Will you allow your suffering to define you, or develop you? This question separates victims from survivors. Not because survivors avoid pain, but because they refuse to let pain become their identity. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the obstacle becomes the way. The very thing standing in your path may become the path itself. Your fear may point toward your purpose. Your heartbreak may awaken your maturity. Your loneliness may introduce you to yourself. Your failure may finally free you from chasing a life that never belonged to you. None of these lessons are pleasant, but they are priceless. Think about the storms you have already survived. Years ago, some of them felt unbearable. Yet here you are, still breathing, still learning, still becoming. That alone proves something extraordinary. You are stronger than the version of yourself who first entered those storms. Growth is rarely visible while it is happening. It reveals itself only when you look back. One day, you realize that the person who once cried over something would now handle the same situation with calm. Not because life became easier, but because you became different. That is real transformation. Not changing the world around you, changing the person, experiencing the world. And perhaps the greatest mystery of all is this: if suffering has been shaping you all along, then what hidden force inside your mind determines how you respond to every challenge? Carl Jung believed the answer lies much deeper than emotion. It lies in the stories you tell yourself. And that is where the next lesson begins. Lesson 4. The story you tell yourself becomes your reality. There is a conversation happening inside your mind every single day. Most of the time, you don't even notice it. It begins the moment you wake up. It follows you through every decision. It speaks when you fail. It speaks when you succeed. It speaks when someone rejects you. It speaks when you are completely alone. And without realizing it, you slowly become the person that voice convinces you that you are. Carl Jung understood something that many people spend their entire lives overlooking. Human beings do not simply experience reality, they interpret it. Two people can walk through the exact same storm and emerge completely different. One sees only proof that life is unfair. The other sees an opportunity to become stronger. The storm did not change. The story did. Think back to one painful moment in your own life. Perhaps someone betrayed your trust. Perhaps you failed at something that mattered deeply. Perhaps you lost someone you loved. The event itself was real. The pain was real. But what happened afterward depended on the meaning your mind attached to that experience. Some people tell themselves, "This happened because I am not enough." Others say, "This happened because life is teaching me something I couldn't learn any other way." The external event is the same. The internal reality becomes completely different. That is why your inner dialogue matters more than you realize. Every belief repeated often enough begins to shape your identity. If you constantly tell yourself that you are weak, your actions will slowly begin to confirm it. If you believe that you are broken beyond repair, you will unconsciously avoid opportunities that could prove otherwise. If you believe you are incapable of change, your mind will stop searching for possibilities. The greatest prison is not built from walls, but it is built from unquestioned beliefs. Jung believed that much of what controls us operates beneath conscious awareness. Many of the stories you believe today were not even created by you. Perhaps a teacher once told you that you would never succeed. Perhaps your parents unintentionally made you believe that love had to be earned. Perhaps repeated failures convinced you that trying again was pointless. Slowly, those experiences became beliefs. Then those beliefs became habits. Then those habits became your personality. Eventually, you started calling them who I am. But what if they never were? Imagine carrying a heavy backpack since childhood. Year after year, more stones are added. Fear, shame, comparison, guilt, failure, rejection. Eventually, the weight feels normal. You forget what it feels like to walk freely. One day someone asks why you're carrying it. Your answer is simple. This is just who I am. But is it? Or have you simply forgotten that the backpack can be removed? This is the beginning of psychological freedom, not changing the past. Changing the meaning you continue giving to the past. Nietzsche once wrote that whoever has a why to live can bear almost any how. Meaning changes endurance. Meaning changes suffering. Meaning changes identity. The events of your life matter, but the interpretation of those events matters even more. This is why two people with similar childhoods can become completely different adults. One becomes trapped by resentment, the other transforms pain into wisdom. The difference often lies in the narrative they choose to carry. Jung called the lifelong process of becoming your authentic self individuation. It begins when you stop living according to unconscious stories and begin writing your own. That process is neither fast nor comfortable. It requires questioning everything. Who told me I wasn't enough? Why do I believe failure defines me? Why do I seek validation from people who don't even understand me? Which fears truly belong to me? And which ones were inherited from others? These questions are unsettling, but they are powerful because every honest answer weakens another. Invisible chain. Imagine waking up tomorrow with no limiting beliefs, no fear of judgment, no voice constantly reminding you of your past mistakes. How differently would you walk? How differently would you speak? How differently would you love? How many opportunities would you finally accept? The remarkable truth is that the person capable of doing those things already exists inside you. The only thing standing between you and that version of yourself is the story you keep repeating. Your mind believes repetition, not truth. Repeat fear often enough, and it feels like reality. Repeat courage often enough, and it slowly becomes your identity. This does not mean lying to yourself. It means refusing to let your worst moments become your permanent definition. You are not your greatest mistake. You are not your deepest wound. You are not your worst day. You are the one who continues choosing who to become after all of those moments have passed. That choice belongs to you. Every single day, every single decision, every single thought. Little by little, the old story loses its power. A new story begins to emerge. Not one built on perfection, but one built on awareness, resilience, responsibility, and truth. Yet there is one obstacle that continues, pulling people back into their old identity. An invisible force that quietly steals peace, confidence, and purpose without making a sound. It appears every time you compare your life to someone else's. And until you understand it, you will never experience genuine freedom. That is where the next lesson begins. Lesson 5. Comparison is the fastest way to lose yourself. There is a silent habit that has stolen more joy than failure, rejection, or even hardship. It is comparison. It begins so quietly that most people never notice it. You see someone more successful, someone wealthier, someone more attractive, someone who seems happier, someone who appears to have found their purpose while you are still searching for yours. Within seconds, your mind begins telling a dangerous story. They are ahead. I'm falling behind. I should be further in life. Without realizing it, you stop living your own journey and begin measuring your worth against someone else's. Carl Jung understood that every individual follows a unique psychological path. No two minds are identical. No two lives unfold in exactly the same way. Trying to compare your destiny to another person's is like comparing the roots of one tree to the branches of another. You are looking at different stages of completely different journeys. Yet modern life encourages comparison every single day. You open your phone within minutes. You are surrounded by carefully edited versions of other people's lives. Victories without sacrifices, smiles without sadness, success without years of invisible struggle, confidence without moments of doubt. You begin believing everyone else has figured life out. Everyone except you. But that illusion comes at a terrible cost. The more you compare, the less you notice your own progress. You become blind to your own growth. Because your attention is fixed on someone else's destination. Imagine climbing a mountain. Every step requires effort. Your legs ache. Your breathing becomes heavier. You stop for a moment and look across the valley. Another climber appears, much higher than you. Immediately your accomplishment disappears. You forget how far you've already come. You see only the distance between you and them. Now imagine something else. That climber began years before you. Or perhaps they're climbing an entirely different mountain. Would the comparison still make sense? Probably not. Yet this is exactly what people do every day. They compare different lives with different histories, different opportunities, different wounds, different talents, and different timing. And they wonder why they feel inadequate. Jung believed that your task is not to become someone else. It is to become more completely yourself. That sentence sounds simple, but it demands tremendous courage. Because becoming yourself means accepting that your path may never resemble anyone else's. Some people discover their purpose early. Others find it after decades of confusion. Some build families. Others build ideas. Some create businesses. Others create art. Some change millions of lives. Others quietly transform the lives of a handful of people. None of these journeys are superior. Only different. The tragedy begins when you abandon your own, calling because someone else's life appears more impressive. Comparison creates endless dissatisfaction. No matter how much you achieve, there will always be someone with more money. More influence, more recognition. More followers. More possessions. If your peace depends on being ahead of everyone else, you will never know peace. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the opinion of others is outside his control. The same applies to comparison. You cannot control another person's success. You can only control your response to it. Instead of asking, why are they ahead? Ask a better question. What can I learn from them? Admiration inspires growth. Comparison destroys it. There is a profound difference. One comes from curiosity. The other comes from insecurity. The moment you stop competing with strangers, you begin competing only with the person you were yesterday. That is the only comparison capable of creating lasting fulfillment. Were you kinder today? More disciplined? More honest? More courageous? Did you take one small step toward becoming the person you hope to be? If the answer is yes, then you are already winning. Not because you defeated someone else, but because you refused to surrender to your old self. Carl Jung warned that envy often reveals something deeper. It points toward the unlived life inside you. When another person's success deeply disturbs you, pause before judging yourself. Ask instead, what desire inside me is this revealing? Perhaps you envy someone's confidence because you have been hiding your own voice. Perhaps you envy someone's freedom because you have been living according to expectations that were never yours. Perhaps you envy someone's creativity because you abandoned your gifts years ago. In this way, envy becomes a compass, not a curse, that reveals where your soul longs to grow. Every emotion carries information. The question is whether you are willing to listen. The happiest people are rarely those who have the most. They are often the ones who have stopped measuring their lives through someone else's eyes. They wake up focused on their own mission. Their own values, their own progress, quietly, patiently, without needing applause. That kind of peace cannot be purchased. It is built one decision at a time, one habit at a time, one honest day at a time. The irony is almost poetic. The moment you stop chasing another person's life, you finally begin living your own. And once that happens, another realization slowly begins to emerge. You discover that your greatest battles were never against other people. They were always against your own undisciplined mind, because no external enemy is more powerful than the chaos you allow to remain within yourself. That is where the next lesson begins. Lesson 6. Master your mind before it masters you. There is a battle happening inside every human being. A battle most people never see. It does not happen in the outside world, but it happens in the silent moments. When you are alone. When the on. Distractions disappear. When your thoughts become louder than everything around you. This is the battlefield of the mind. And Carl Jung understood something that many people refuse to accept. A person who cannot understand their own mind will eventually become controlled by it. Your thoughts are powerful, but they are not always true. Your emotions are intense, but they are not always accurate. Your fears feel real, but they are not always reality. The problem is that most people never learn to separate themselves from the activity happening inside their own consciousness. They become their thoughts. They become their emotions. They become their fears. And once that happens, the mind becomes a prison. Imagine waking up every morning and immediately entering a room filled with voices. Some voices tell you that you are not good enough. Some remind you of past failures. Some predict future disasters. Some compare you to everyone around you. And because you hear these voices every day, you begin believing they are you. But Jung would argue that awareness creates distance. The moment you observe your thoughts instead of blindly following them, something changes. You realize, I am not every thought that appears in my mind. I am the one who observes those thoughts. This simple realization can completely transform your relationship with yourself. The ancient Stoics understood this centuries before modern psychology. Epictetus taught that people are not disturbed by things themselves, but by the judgments they create about those things. A difficult situation does not automatically destroy your peace. Your interpretation of that situation does. Someone insults you. The event happens. But the suffering afterward comes from the meaning you attach to it. Everyone disrespects me. I am worthless. I need revenge. The mind creates a story. Then you suffer because of the story. The Stoics called this the space between what happens and how we respond. That space is where freedom exists. Most people live without that space. Something happens. They react. Someone criticizes them. They become angry. They experience failure. They collapse. They feel fear. They surrender. Their emotions become their masters. But a disciplined mind learns something different. It learns to pause, to observe, to choose. This does not mean becoming emotionless. It means becoming the person who leads your emotions instead of being dragged by them. Carl Jung believed it's psychological. Maturity comes when consciousness becomes strong enough to face the unconscious forces within. In simple words, you become stronger when you can sit with uncomfortable emotions without immediately escaping. Most people run from themselves. They use endless entertainment, constant noise. Addictions. Busyness. Anything to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But silence reveals everything. It reveals your fears, your unresolved pain, your hidden desires, your contradictions. And this is exactly why many people fear silence. Because silence removes the masks. There is nowhere to hide. But the person who learns to enter silence willingly gains a power most people never develop. Self-awareness. The ability to see yourself clearly. Not the version you show others. Not the version you wish you were. The real version. With strengths. With weaknesses. With potential. With flaws. That honesty is the beginning of transformation. Marcus Aurelius spent years writing reminders to himself because he understood something important. Even a powerful person must constantly train their own mind. Being mentally strong is not a permanent achievement. It is a daily practice. Your mind is like a garden. If you do not cultivate it, weeds will grow automatically. Fear, doubt, resentment, laziness, negativity. They require no effort. They appear naturally. Discipline is the act of planting something better. A stronger belief, a healthier habit, a wiser perspective, calmer response. Every day you're training your mind. The question is, are you training it intentionally? Or are you allowing the world to train it for you? Because everything you consume shapes you. The conversations you listen to, the content you watch, the people you surround yourself with, the thoughts you repeatedly entertain. All of them leave fingerprints on your consciousness. A weak mind absorbs everything. A disciplined mind chooses what enters. This is why solitude can become such a powerful teacher. When you spend time alone without distractions, you begin noticing patterns. You notice which thoughts appear repeatedly. You notice what triggers your emotions. You notice what you avoid. And slowly, you begin taking back control, not through force, Through understanding, Jung never believed humans should simply suppress their darkness. He believed they should understand it, because what you understand can no longer control you in the same way. A person who knows their weaknesses can protect themselves. A person who knows their fears can confront them. A person who knows their patterns can change them. But a person who remains unconscious becomes a prisoner of invisible forces. And that is one of the greatest tragedies of human life. People spend years trying to change their circumstances while refusing to examine the mind, creating those circumstances. They change jobs, they change relationships, they change locations, but they carry the same unconscious patterns everywhere. Because the real battlefield was never outside, it was always within. The moment you begin mastering your mind, you stop being controlled by every passing emotion. You become calmer, more intentional, more difficult to manipulate. You stop reacting to life. You begin responding to it, and that creates a new level of freedom. But there is still something deeper, because even after learning to control your thoughts, you must face the most powerful force hidden inside the human psyche, the part of yourself that determines whether you remain trapped in the past or become the person you were meant to be. The next lesson reveals the final battle every person must eventually face. Lesson 7. You must let your old self die. There is a truth about transformation that almost nobody wants to accept. You cannot become a new person while desperately protecting the old. 1. Real change requires a kind of death, not a physical death. A psychological one. The death of old beliefs, old identities, old habits, old versions of yourself that no longer belong in the future you are trying to create. Carl Jung understood that growth is not simply adding new things to your life. Sometimes, growth means removing what has been holding you back for years. But this process is painful because the human mind naturally seeks familiarity. Even if familiarity hurts, a person can remain in a miserable situation simply because it feels known. They may complain about their life every day. They may feel exhausted. They may feel trapped. But the idea of changing feels even more frightening. Why? Because the unknown requires courage. The old self may be suffering, but at least it knows how to survive. The new self requires trust. It requires stepping into uncertainty. It requires leaving behind the identity that protected you in the past. Imagine a snake refusing to shed its skin. At first, the old skin feels safe. It is familiar. It has protected the snake. But eventually, what once protected it becomes a prison. The snake cannot grow while holding on to what it has already outgrown. Human beings are the same. There is a version of you that was created to survive certain moments. Maybe it was created during childhood, maybe during heartbreak, maybe during failure, maybe during a period when you felt powerless. That version of you learned certain rules. Never trust anyone. Never take risks. Never show weakness. Never try because failure hurts too much. Those beliefs may have protected you once, but protection is not the same as progress. A shield that saves you from one battle can become the thing preventing you from entering the next one. This is why transformation often feels like losing yourself, because in a way, you are. But you are not losing your true self. You are losing the artificial layers that covered it. Jung called this process individuation. The journey of becoming whole. Not perfect. Whole. There is a huge difference. Perfection means rejecting anything uncomfortable. Wholeness means accepting whole parts of yourself and integrating them. Your strength, your weakness, your courage, your fear, your light, your shadow. A person who denies their darkness becomes controlled by it. A person who accepts it can transform it. This is why Jung believed the path to becoming yourself requires confrontation with the unconscious. You must meet the parts of yourself you abandoned, the frightened child, the wounded person. The angry version. The insecure version. The dreamer you silenced. Many people spend their lives running from these parts. They say, I just want to forget the past. But the past does not disappear because you ignore it. It waits. It influences your choices. It shapes your relationships. It affects your confidence. What you refuse to face continues controlling you from the usity, shadows. But what you confront can finally be healed. This is not an easy journey. There are moments where you feel completely lost. Moments where your old identity has collapsed, but your new identity has not yet formed. This is the uncomfortable space between who you were and who you are becoming. Many people quit here. They return to old habits, relationships. Old patterns, not because they were happy, but because uncertainty became unbearable. Nietzsche understood this struggle. He believed that a person must become who they are, but becoming requires overcoming. You must overcome the weaker version of yourself, the version controlled by fear, the version addicted to comfort, the version constantly seeking permission, the version waiting for the perfect moment. The perfect moment never arrives. Transformation begins when you decide that your future is more important than your comfort. This is where discipline becomes essential. Many people think discipline is punishment. It is not. Discipline is self-respect in action. It is choosing your long-term growth over your short-term emotions. It is waking up when you do not feel motivated. It is keeping promises you made to yourself. It is becoming someone you can trust, because one of the greatest sources of suffering is losing trust in yourself. Every time you say you will do something and don't, a small piece of confidence disappears. Every time you avoid what you know you need to face, your mind records that avoidance. But every time you keep a promise to yourself, you rebuild your identity. You prove that you are capable of change. Transformation is not created by one massive decision. It is created through thousands of small moments where you choose your higher self over your weaker impulses. The person you become is built in those invisible moments, when nobody is watching, when nobody is applauding, when there is no reward except knowing you are becoming stronger. That is true character, not what you show the world. What you do when the world is absent. And eventually something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel unfamiliar to yourself. The things that once controlled you no longer have the same power. The opinions that once destroyed your confidence become background noise. The fears that once stopped you become challenges you are willing to face. You realize something important. You are never trying to create a completely new person. You are removing everything that prevented your real self from emerging. But there is still one final enemy standing in the way of complete transformation. An enemy so subtle that many people mistake it for ambition. An enemy that can destroy peace. Even after success arrives, it is the endless desire to become more, while forgetting to appreciate who you already are. And understanding this final illusion changes everything, because the next lesson is about the one thing that can either imprison your life or set you completely free. Lesson 8. Stop chasing the future and learn to master the present. There is a silent thief that steals the lives of millions of people. It does not steal money. It does not steal possessions. It steals something far more valuable. The present moment. Most people are physically living in today, but mentally trapped somewhere else. They are prisoners of the past, replaying old mistakes, old conversations, old regrets. Or they are prisoners of the future, constantly worrying about what might happen, what could go wrong, and whether they will ever become the person they want to be. And while they are lost between yesterday and tomorrow, life quietly passes in front of them. Carl Jung understood that the human mind has a dangerous tendency. It creates imaginary worlds and then forces us to live inside them. The past becomes a prison. The future becomes an illusion, and the only place where life actually exists, present. Is ignored. Think about the last time you experienced a truly peaceful moment. Maybe it was watching the sunrise. Maybe it was walking alone at night. Maybe it was sitting somewhere quiet without needing to prove anything to anyone. For a brief moment, your mind stopped fighting. You were not analyzing the past. You were not fearing the future. You were simply there, fully alive. That is the state most people spend their entire lives searching for. But they search for it in the wrong places. They believe peace will come after they achieve something, after they earn more money. After they become successful. After everyone recognizes their value. But then they achieve the goal and discover the mind simply creates another one. Another mountain, another achievement. Another reason they are not enough yet. This endless chase can continue forever, because the problem was never the destination. The problem was the belief that peace exists somewhere outside yourself. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that the only moment truly belonging to him was the present one. The past had already disappeared. The future had not arrived. Only this moment could be controlled. Yet, modern life trains people to abandon the present. Everything demands your attention. Notifications, messages, news, opinions, expectations. The world constantly pulls your mind away from yourself. And if you are not careful, you can spend your entire life distracted from your own existence. Jung believed that becoming conscious requires presence. You cannot understand yourself if you are always escaping yourself. You cannot heal wounds you refuse to feel. You cannot discover your purpose if you are constantly running from silence. The present moment is where transformation happens. Not someday. Not when everything is perfect. Now. The person you want to become is not created in some imaginary future. That person is built through the choices you make today. The way you speak today. The discipline you practice today. The thoughts you allow today. The habits you repeat today. Your future self is watching the decisions your current self is making. Every action is a vote for the person you are becoming. This is why small choices matter. People underestimate small choices because they do not immediately create dramatic results. One workout does not transform your body. One book does not transform your mind. One disciplined decision does not transform your entire life, but repeated consistently, they create an entirely different person. A different identity. A different reality. Transformation is not a sudden explosion. It is a quiet accumulation. Like a mountain being formed one grain of earth at a time. The problem is that people want visible results from invisible work. They want confidence before taking action. They want motivation before beginning. They want certainty before moving forward. But life rarely works that way. Action creates confidence. Movement creates clarity. Discipline creates freedom. You do not discover yourself by thinking endlessly. You discover yourself by engaging with life. By trying. By failing. By learning. By adapting. By continuing. This is why solitude is so powerful. When you remove distractions, you finally meet yourself. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. The silence feels too loud. The thoughts become impossible to ignore. The emotions you buried begin appearing. But eventually something changes. You stop fearing your own mind. You begin understanding it. And understanding creates peace. A person who is comfortable being alone is difficult to control. They no longer need constant approval. They no longer need endless entertainment. They no longer need to escape every uncomfortable feeling. They have built a relationship with themselves. And that relationship becomes the foundation for everything else. Because how can you create a meaningful life if you are constantly avoiding the person who has to live it? The greatest journey is not traveling across the world. It is traveling inward, into your fears, into your beliefs, into your unconscious patterns, into the places within yourself that you have ignored for years. That is where you discover the truth that you were never incomplete. You are simply disconnected from yourself. But there is still another challenge, because even after learning to live in the present, you must answer one of the deepest questions of human existence. Why are you here? What is the purpose behind your struggle? What gives your life meaning when comfort disappears? Because a person without purpose can have everything and still feel empty. The next lesson reveals why discovering your purpose may be the most important psychological transformation of all. Lesson 9. Discover your purpose or become a prisoner of distraction. There is a question hidden beneath almost every human desire. A question that people often avoid because the answer demands responsibility. Why am I here? Not what do I want to buy? Not what do I want people to think about me? Not what achievement will finally make me feel important, but something much deeper. What is the reason my life exists? Carl Jung believed that one of the greatest psychological crises of modern humanity is the loss of meaning. A person can have comfort, they can have entertainment, they can have possessions, they can have attention from others. And still feel a strange emptiness inside, a silent feeling that something is missing. Because the human soul does not only need pleasure, it needs purpose. Without purpose, even success can feel meaningless. Without purpose, freedom can become confusion. Without purpose, every day begins to feel like a repetition of the last. Wake up, work, consume, sleep, repeat, and somewhere in the middle of this routine, many people lose the connection with themselves. They become efficient at surviving, but they forget how to truly live. Jung studied countless patients who suffered not because they lacked external achievements, but because they lacked an inner direction. They had everything society told them to desire. Yet internally, they felt disconnected. The problem was not that they had no goals. The problem was that their goals were borrowed. They were chasing what they were told would make them happy. They were climbing a ladder, only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. This is one of the most painful realizations a person can experience. To spend years building a life only to realize it was never truly yours. But that realization is also a gift, because awareness is the beginning of change. Purpose is not something you simply find. It is something you build through understanding yourself. It emerges when your actions become aligned with your deepest values, when the way you live matches the person you believe you should become. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self. Not the self created by society. Not the self created by fear. Not the self created to impress others. The real self, the one beneath all the masks. Finding that self requires courage, because your purpose may not look impressive to everyone else. It may not receive applause. It may not make sense to people who are following a different path. But purpose is not about being understood by everyone. It is about being honest with yourself. Nietzsche understood this struggle deeply. He believed that a person must create their own values rather than blindly accepting those imposed by society. The crowd has opinions. The crowd has expectations. The crowd has rules. But the individual must eventually decide, what kind of person do I want to become? This question is terrifying because it removes excuses. Once you know your direction, you become responsible for your choices. You can no longer blame circumstances forever. You can no longer pretend you have no power. Purpose creates responsibility, and responsibility creates strength. Think about a person lost in a forest. The darkness surrounds them. They do not know where to walk. Every direction feels equally uncertain. Fear grows. But then, in the distance, they see a light. A small light. It does not reveal the entire path. It does not remove every obstacle, but it gives them a direction. That is what purpose does. It does not eliminate difficulty. It gives difficulty meaning. A person with purpose can endure challenges that would destroy someone without direction. This is why some people survive incredible hardships. They have a reason, a mission, something greater than immediate comfort. The question is not whether life will challenge you. It will. Everyone suffers. Everyone loses. Everyone faces uncertainty. The question is, what will make you continue when life becomes difficult? What reason will pull you forward when motivation disappears? That answer becomes your foundation. But purpose is not only about grand achievements. Many people misunderstand this. They imagine purpose must be something extraordinary. Changing the world, becoming famous, leaving a legacy remembered by millions. But purpose can also exist in simple things. Being a person of integrity, helping others, mastering your craft, developing wisdom. Creating something valuable, becoming someone you respect. Purpose is not measured by how many people know your name. It is measured by how deeply your actions reflect your values. A quiet life lived with meaning is more powerful than a loud life lived without direction. The tragedy is that many people wait for purpose to appear. They wait for a perfect moment, a sign, a sudden revelation. But purpose is usually discovered through movement, through action. Through exploration. Through trying things and learning what awakens something inside you. You do not find your purpose by sitting still forever. You find it by walking. By experimenting. Paying attention to what gives your life energy. By noticing what problems you feel called to solve. By recognizing what responsibilities you are willing to carry. Because purpose is not only about what you love. It is also about what you are willing to sacrifice for. Anything meaningful requires commitment. And commitment requires discipline. This is where many people fail. They want the feeling of purpose without accepting the responsibility that comes with it. They want the reward without the process. But every meaningful path contains difficulty. Every dream has obstacles. Every transformation has moments of doubt. Purpose does not make life easier. It makes life worth fighting for. And once you discover that, something changes inside you. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you begin asking, what is this trying to teach me? You stop seeing obstacles as enemies. You begin seeing them as training. You stop running from challenges. You begin using them as opportunities to grow. Because a person with purpose does not need a perfect life. They need a meaningful one. And yet there is one final lesson that brings everything together. After facing your shadow, after abandoning the need for approval. After mastering your mind. After discovering purpose, you must learn the ultimate form of psychological freedom. The ability to accept life completely. The ability to remain peaceful even when uncertainty remains. Because the final transformation is not becoming someone who controls everything dot. It is becoming someone who can face anything. And that is where the final lesson begins. Lesson 10. Accept yourself completely and become unbreakable. There is a final truth that every person must eventually face. You cannot become free while fighting against yourself. You cannot find peace while constantly rejecting parts of your own existence. You cannot become whole while believing that some parts of you are unacceptable. For most of their lives, people are at war with themselves. They hate their mistakes. They regret their past. They reject their weaknesses. They hide their fears. They pretend their pain does not exist. They spend years trying to become someone else, without realizing that the greatest transformation begins when they finally accept who they are. Carl Jung dedicated much of his life's work to one central idea. The goal of life is not to become perfect. The goal is to become whole. Wholeness means accepting the complete human experience, the beautiful moments, the painful moments, the victories. The failures, the confidence. The insecurity, the light, the shadow. Because a person who accepts only the positive parts of themselves creates a false identity. They become dependent on maintaining an image, and anything that threatens that image creates fear. But a person who has integrated themselves becomes different. They no longer need to pretend. They no longer need to constantly prove their worth. They know who they are, not because they are flawless, but because they have stopped abandoning themselves. This is true psychological strength, not the absence of weakness, the acceptance of weakness without allowing it to control you. Think about a tree standing during a violent storm. A weak tree tries to resist the wind completely. It refuses to bend. Eventually, it breaks. But a strong tree moves with the storm. Its roots are deep enough that the wind cannot destroy it. Human beings are the same. Strength is not becoming someone who never feels pain. Strength is becoming someone who can experience pain without losing themselves. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, war, illness, and personal loss. Yet he constantly reminded himself that his peace could not depend on external events. The world could change, people could disappoint him. Circumstances could become difficult, but his inner character remained his responsibility. That is the final level of freedom. Understanding that your power is not in controlling everything that happens. Your power is in choosing who you become because of what happens. Life will test you. There will be days when confidence disappears. Days when the future feels uncertain. Days when you question whether your efforts are worth it. Those moments are not signs that you are failing. They are part of being human. The mistake many people make is believing that transformation means reaching a place where struggles disappear. It does not. Transformation means becoming someone who can face struggles differently. The same problem that once destroyed you becomes something you can handle. The same fear that once controlled you becomes something you can confront. The same loneliness that once felt like punishment becomes a place where you discover yourself. This is the journey Jung wanted people to understand. The journey inward. The journey toward becoming conscious. The journey toward becoming the person hidden beneath years of conditioning. Because somewhere beneath the expectations, beneath the fears, beneath the masks, there is a version of you that has always existed. A version that does not need permission to exist. A version that does not need constant validation. A version that understands its own value. The tragedy is that many people spend their entire lives searching for something they already carry within themselves. They search for confidence. They search for meaning. They search for peace. They search for identity. But they search outside. Through achievements, through possessions, through approval, through distractions. And they never realized that the answer was waiting inside them all along. The final lesson is simple. Stop running from yourself. The person you fear becoming. The memories you avoid. The emotions you suppress. The weaknesses you hide. Everything you have rejected contains a message. Everything you have buried is asking to be understood. The darkness inside you is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that there are parts of yourself waiting to be integrated. And when you finally stop fighting those parts, something incredible happens. You become calmer because you are no longer divided against yourself. You become stronger because you are no longer pretending weakness does not exist. You become wiser because you have learned from every experience instead of running from it. And you become free, not because life became predictable, but because uncertainty no longer controls you. You understand that storms are temporary. Opinions are temporary. Failures are temporary. Even the version of yourself that exists today is temporary. Life is a constant process of becoming. Every morning, you have the opportunity to choose again. To think differently, to act differently, to become someone slightly closer to your highest potential. You do not need to transform overnight. You only need to stop betraying yourself, one honest decision at a time. One disciplined action at a time. One moment of courage at a time. The person you want to become is not created in a single dramatic moment. They are created quietly, in the choices. Nobody sees, in the battles. Nobody knows about, in the moments where you choose growth over comfort. Where you choose truth over illusion. Where you choose yourself, so when the world becomes silent tonight, and you are alone with your thoughts, do not run, listen, because beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the expectations, there is a deeper voice waiting. The voice of the person you were always meant to become. Carl Jung spent a lifetime studying the human soul, and perhaps his greatest lesson was this: until you make peace with yourself, you will continue searching for a home that was never outside of you. Your life is not a problem to solve. It is a journey to understand. Your pain is not your enemy, it is a teacher. Your shadow is not your weakness, that is a forgotten part of your strength. Your solitude is not emptiness, it is where you finally meet yourself. And your transformation does not begin when the world changes, it begins when you do. Because the greatest victory a human being can achieve, is not conquering others, it is conquering the chaos within, and when you finally master yourself, nothing outside of you can ever take away your peace.